Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama, the only show that gets you a weekly roundup of all that's been happening in the international arena. I'm Ishan and these are the headlines, the international headlines of this week. Escalating tension between the US and China over the South China Sea issued to take center stage at the Singapore meet of defense officials about managing the resource-rich area. Paris River Seine rises to 30-year high. Thousands evacuated, parts of metro systems and major landmarks closed, including the Louvre. Indian-American techie Mayanak Sarkar, identified as the gunman who killed a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. Sarkar was reportedly accused by the professor of stealing his computer code. And the US issues warning about traveling to Europe this summer due to terror risk at tourist sites. State Department says Euro 2016 and the Tour de France are under risk. Well, the big story this week, tensions between the United States and China continue to escalate in the South China Sea, with freedom of navigation in one of the world's most critical maritime passages potentially at stake. With no resolution in sight, both sides are ramping up their military capabilities in the massive body of water, potentially including nuclear weaponry and anti-ballistic missiles.
Hundreds of defense officials are meeting in Singapore this weekend to talk about managing the widely contested, resource-rich South China Sea. The forum might actually turn into a verbal water fight over what everyone should do about China after a United Nations court ruled sometime this month whether Beijing has rights to about 95% of the sea, including militarization of its islands. Speaking at a security summit in Singapore, influential US Senator John McCain cautioned China, saying it will face consequences if it rejects the UN court ruling.
China can choose to disrupt the rules-based order, or it can choose to become a vital partner in maintaining it. I fear the consequences if China chooses the path of disruption, but I am confident that if China chooses the path of partnership and cooperation.
The White House also warned China, urging it to join a principled security network for Asia or risk erecting a great wall of self-isolation.
China's actions in the South China Sea are isolating it at a time when the entire region is coming together and networking. Unfortunately, if these actions continue, China could end up erecting a great wall of self-isolation.
Meanwhile, China has urged the US to honor its commitment of not taking sides in the territorial disputes over the South China Sea.
In reality, the US is not a claimant in the South China Sea controversy. They have said themselves that they don't hold a position on territorial sovereignty controversies. So we hope that the US can refrain themselves and vow not to pick sides and instead determine their position based on the truths and falsehoods of the issue and not on who their allies are.
Beijing's claim to nearly the entire South China Sea has angered Southeast Asian neighbors and pitted it against the United States, which has conducted patrols near Chinese-held islands to press for freedom of navigation. The contested waters encompass key global shipping lanes. The Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia and Vietnam have also competing claims in the area, which is believed to have significant oil and gas deposits. Bureau Report, Raj Sapati.
And I'm joined by Javan T Jayker, Assistant Director at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Javan, to help us understand, as far as South China Sea is concerned, as China itself in that story was saying that the US does not have a stake in this, the US is not a party to this conflict. So the pressure that is being mounted on China, how do you see this playing out in the global scenario?
Well, I think first of all, the Chinese are drawing a false contradiction. The US does not take any sides as far as territorial claims are concerned. But the US has always been very clear, as has India, that the issue at stake is freedom of navigation. And China's reclamation activities in islands on rocks and reefs that are also being claimed by others actually has potential to endanger security and freedom of navigation. And China's recent record of declaring an air defense identification zone in the East China Sea also prompts fears that the Chinese will do exactly the same thing in the South China Sea as well. And so that is the issue at stake.
All right, but India is also participating in this meet in Singapore and coming at a time when India is really trying to assert itself as a global power and as far as the South China Sea conflicts or the issue is concerned, we've also been voicing our opinion over there. So what's at stake for India and how's India going about confronting China on this issue and why does it want to?
The issue really is of adherence to international law, international norms. And I think that's where India's concerns are. And India also has over 50% of its trade passing through these waters.
Okay.
So what China does in these waters is of importance to India as well. And that's why India has raised its voice. It has an interest, it has a legitimate interest in these waters.
Okay, but then how does this conflict get resolved? How do these parties come on the talking table? They are, but there is also talk of increased militarization, etc., which could, a conflict could escalate at any time. So how real is that possibility and can this be resolved?
Well, I think the conflict, as we've seen as of now, the Chinese Navy itself is not getting involved in these incidents, shall we say. It's usually the Chinese militia, the Chinese Coast Guard or Chinese fishing vessels that are getting involved in these. So whatever incidents at sea that we hear of involve Chinese fishing vessels or the Coast Guard. But the recent incident of a Chinese Air Force plane buzzing an American aircraft, flying too close to this American aircraft, which can create accidents. So there is, on the one hand, the Chinese are trying to take the line that, well, it's our fishing vessels and they are in historic fishing grounds, but not understanding that others also have equally same concerns or equally same claims to the historical fishing grounds. The other thing is, how do we resolve it? I mean, the two sides, ASEAN and China, have a declaration on a code of conduct in the South China Sea, in these waters, about how they shall deal with these situations. But the problem is that an actual code of conduct has not been agreed between the two sides.
Okay.
So as long as this code of conduct doesn't come into place, and it doesn't look like the Chinese want such a code of conduct in place before they have strengthened, they have fortified their positions in these disputed islands and reefs. So I think that's where the problem is. It doesn't look like, in my personal view, is that it doesn't look like there is any way that we can roll back Chinese actions. I think the Chinese are going to stay put, and the world will have to find some new way of ensuring that the Chinese actions do not actually create problems in terms of freedom of navigation, in terms of overflight, in terms of pressure on other smaller navies, smaller fishing fleets of the other countries.
Is there a fear of more militarization of the ASEAN countries? As you mentioned, they have smaller fleets, but then there's support from US. India is selling BrahMos missiles to Vietnam. So in that sense, is there a fear of more militarization?
I think yes. There is, ASEAN nations are likely to see their budgets go up. But I think we should also understand that ASEAN nations have been dealing with China for a very long time. China is not going anywhere. I think they have sort of faced up to the reality that China will both militarize as well as grow in economic power. And Chinese and ASEAN economies are extremely closely tied to the Chinese economy. So, and the Chinese have the power to turn off the tap to affect ASEAN economies. For example, take Vietnam. The Vietnamese, China is one of the biggest investors in Vietnam. China is one of the biggest, is Vietnam's biggest trading partner. And China, the Vietnamese are, China is the biggest market for Vietnamese rice, which is an important export for the Vietnamese. And for a few months, a couple of years ago, the Chinese started increasing their checks on the border trade. And that impact rolled over for several months on the Vietnamese economy. So the Vietnamese, who we perceive as one of the toughest Chinese opponents, are also going to be extremely careful. So I think there's going to be a balance in ASEAN reactions on this.
All right, Jabin, thanks very much for coming in and helping us understand how this conflict is playing out or could play out in the coming days. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Well, moving on now, we'll take a very quick break, but on the other side, we'll talk about France that is battling floods. The Seine has broken its banks in several places. In fact, the lower shutter to protect priceless artworks. All that and more on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama. Now, the River Seine in France continued to rise on Friday after bursting its banks in several places earlier this week. This forced officials in Paris to erect emergency barriers and close metro stations and museums.
The flooded River Seine in Paris rose 6 meters above its normal level on Friday after bursting its banks in several places earlier this week. It's now flowing at over 30-year high levels. Paris's world-famous Louvre and Orsay museums were forced to shut down in order to move priceless artworks to safety.
Last week we could walk along the banks. It was very pleasant. There was a bit of sun and everything. But today it's flooded. It's impressive how it can change in a week.
Once again, the works as far as Louvre is concerned are not at risk, but we had to gather workers to move the stocks and just to put in place the prevention plan that had been well defined and prepared and which is going on well.
While the flood is unlikely to submerge the city centre, residents living near the Seine were urged to clean their basements. More than 20,000 people have been evacuated in France since the weekend, and around 19,000 homes are without power. People could be seen coming together to help those stranded. Soldiers and Red Cross volunteers also helped in moving people from their homes in boats.
We are trying to help people get home, mainly elderly people. Not too long ago, we delivered food to an elderly person because they are completely blocked. There are places where we can't even go because water is higher than 1 to 1.5 meters. We can't get there.
It is very emotional, it is very sad. It is upsetting that they can't stop this happening in a city like Paris, and it puts lots of people in a very difficult position.
French Environment Minister Ségolène Royal said the Seine's water level continued to rise slowly, but that high waters elsewhere in France had started to recede. At least 2 people have died in the flood so far. More bodies are likely to be recovered as waters recede.
The water is starting to recede, but this is slow. I was on the phone with the prefect who said that the water level has decreased by 90 centimeters, but slowly. But hope is coming and the people are starting to feel more positive because we see that the water is starting to recede.
Even as the Seine flooded higher, it remained well below the record high of 8.6 meters reached in 1910 when thousands of Parisians had to flee flooded low-lying areas of the city. Floodwaters may still take several weeks to recede after the wettest May in France for 100 years. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Now, the United States has warned that the Euro 2016 Football Championship being held in France next month could be the target of militant attacks. The State Department warned its citizens of possible summer terrorist attacks in Europe, saying targets could include the European Soccer Championship in France, although there was no specific threat information. Euro 2016 Championship is being hosted from the 10th of June to the 10th of July at various venues. Up to 1 million foreign fans are expected in France for the tournament, which involves the continent's top national teams. Concern about security in Europe has increased since the November 13th attacks in Paris that left 130 people dead, as well as the March attacks in which 2 suicide bombers struck the Brussels airport and the third the city's metro, killing 32 people.
I'm not aware of any specific credible terrorist threat around these events or in any particular place in Europe. This alert was issued just as they always are, based on accumulation of information. What we know continues to be an interest by terrorist groups to conduct attacks against Western targets and Americans specifically in Europe.
Now, tensions in Northeast Asia continue to grow after North Korea's latest attempt to test fire a missile field on Tuesday. Following the unsuccessful launch, South Korea and Japan have put their security forces on alert.
Adding to a string of recent unsuccessful launches, North Korea's attempt to test fire a ballistic missile failed once again, the fourth time this year. South Korean Defense Ministry said Pyongyang attempted to fire a missile from its east coast early on Tuesday, but it likely exploded soon after ignition. North Korea had earlier attempted 3 test launches of the intermediate-range missile in April, all of which had failed.
North Korea attempted to launch a missile at around 5:20 a.m. local time earlier today in the area of Wonsan, but as of now, our military presume that it has failed. Our military has maintained readiness as we are bracing for possibilities of additional provocations.
The most recent launch follows South Korea's rejection of an offer of talks from the north. Japan, meanwhile, has put its anti-ballistic missile forces on alert after detecting signs of launches and has ordered its naval destroyers and anti-ballistic missile batteries to be ready.
In order to take all possible measures to protect the lives and assets of our people under any circumstances, we have ordered the self-defense forces to take necessary actions.
Tension in Northeast Asia has been high since North Korea conducted its 4th nuclear test in January and followed that with a satellite launch and test launches of various missiles. North Korea's only major ally, China, has called for the cessation of any action that would aggravate tension in the North Korean peninsula. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The Indian-American gunman Mainak Sarkar, who shot dead his former college professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, had also killed his wife before taking his own life. Police said that a kill list was found from Sarkar's home in Minnesota and both victims were on the list. The list also contained the name of another UCLA professor who was unharmed. On Thursday, students and faculty members of the university held a candlelight vigil to mourn the death of the deceased professor. On Wednesday, 38-year-old Sarkar shot dead engineering professor William Klug before killing himself in an attack that prompted a 2-hour lockdown of the UCLA campus. The attack appeared to have been provoked by Sarkar's belief that Klug had stolen his computer code.
In the search of Sarkar's residence in Minneapolis, a list was located that had Professor Klug's name on it, another UCLA's professor's name on it, and the name of the female victim that was later located in the nearby town. That list has been described as a kill list. That was the wording that was put on it.
Much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of other international news of the week in Globe Watch.
Turkey has recalled its ambassador from Berlin after German MPs approved a motion describing the massacre of Armenians by Ottoman forces as genocide. Armenians claim that 1.5 million of their people died in the atrocities of 1915. Turkey rejected the claim and said the toll was much lower and cannot be termed as genocide. More than 20 nations, including France and Russia, recognized the 1915 killings as genocide. At least 36 people were killed and more than 100 others were injured as a severe windstorm coupled with heavy rain wreaked havoc in parts of Pakistan. The gusty wind of more than 150 kilometers per hour, accompanied by rain, swept through the twin cities of Rawalpindi and Islamabad and parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, uprooting trees, electricity poles, damaging houses and suspending power supply in several areas. The casualties were mainly caused by falling trees, signboards and electricity poles and incidents of roof collapse. The International Crimes Tribunal in Bangladesh has sentenced one person to death and another two to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity during the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. The tribunal said the trio had taken a stand against Bangladesh's struggle for independence and joined the Razakar militia raised by the Pakistan Army. French investigators have confirmed that a French naval vessel has detected underwater signals from one of the black boxes of the Egypt airplane that crashed last month. So far, search teams have found small pieces of debris, victims' remains, and personal effects from the plane. They have not found the aircraft's fuselage.
There were 66 people on board when the Airbus A320 crashed on 19th of May while flying from Paris to Cairo. It vanished from Greek and Egyptian radar screens, apparently without having sent a distress call. The world's longest and deepest rail tunnel was officially opened in Switzerland after almost 2 decades of construction work. The 57-kilometer twin-bore Gotthard-based tunnel will provide a high-speed rail link under the Swiss Alps between northern and southern Europe. The tunnel has overtaken Japan's 53.9 kilometers Seacon Rail Tunnel as the longest in the world and pushed the 50.5 kilometer Channel Tunnel linking the UK and France into third place.
Let's shift focus now and bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week. Here's all the sports action.
Lester Cook became the first Englishman to reach 10,000 test runs before leading his team to an emphatic 9-wicket win over Sri Lanka in the second test on Monday to wrap up the series. The left-handed opener was the youngest player and 12th overall to reach the landmark as he helped England secure victory on the 4th day that gave the hosts an unbeatable 2-0 lead in the 3-match series. Justin Gatlin edged fellow American Amir Webb to win the men's 100 meters at Rome Diamond League meeting on Thursday. Gatlin stormed to the finish in 9.93 seconds, while Amir followed a heel with 1/100th of a second behind. Frenchman Jimmy Vico also dipped under the 10-second mark with 9.99. Ethiopian Almaz Ayana produced the performance of the night as she ran the second fastest 5,000 meters of all time, clocking 14 minutes 12.59 seconds, narrowly missing out on a new world record. Ayana's fellow countrywoman Tirunesh Dibaba has kept her world mark of 14 minutes 11.15 seconds for 8 years. Lewis Hamilton celebrated his first win of the Formula One season at the Monaco Grand Prix on Sunday after Mercedes told teammate Nico Rosberg to move aside and Red Bull wrecked Daniel Ricciardo's chances. While fortune finally favoured the triple world champion after a run of bad luck, championship leader Rosberg finished 7th, 93.2 seconds behind, and saw his lead cut to 24 points after 6 of 21 races. England's Chris Wood came from 3 shots down to win the BMW PGA Championship at Wentworth. Wood corded a 3-under par 69 on the final round to finish 1 shot ahead of Rickard Karlberg, who struck a stunning 65, including a hole-in-one. Masters champion Danny Willett slipped off the lead to finish 3rd. A poor 76 in the 3rd round cost Willett the title as he finished 7 under par, 2 shots behind Wood. German midfielder Ilkay Gundogan has joined Manchester City from Bundesliga side Borussia Dortmund on a 4-year deal, the Premier League club announced on Thursday. Gundogan, who also missed the 2014 World Cup with a back injury, made more than 150 appearances in 5 years at Dortmund after being recruited by Jurgen Klopp, who is now in charge of Liverpool. The midfielder was part of Klopp's Dortmund side that won a domestic double in Germany in the 2011-12 season.
That's all in World Panorama, but as we go, there is a little bit of sad news that happened this week as well. Boxing legend and one of the sport's greatest heroes, Muhammad Ali, died on Friday night. He was 74. Ali had been suffering from a respiratory illness, a condition which was complicated by his long-standing Parkinson's disease. A vibrant and an outspoken personality, Ali was the first man to win heavyweight titles 3 times. He finished his career winning 56 of his 61 fights with 37 knockouts, some of which are considered to be the finest in boxing history. We leave you with glimpses from this great man's career.